Yeah, fancy a Bible break? We're working our way through the story of Abram, and we've got to Genesis chapter 21. That we're going to read the whole chapter today. And as the subtitle in my NIV says, it's the birth of Isaac to kick off. So here we go, Genesis 21. So that's verse 1 to verse 34, the end of the chapter. Here we go. Now, the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abram in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abram gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abram circumcised him as God commanded him. Abram was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abram that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abram held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar, the Egyptian, had born to Abram was mocking. So that would be Ishmael, yeah. And she said to Abram, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abram greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring. Early the next morning, Abram took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shoot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there nearby, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what's the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, said to Abram, God is with you in everything you do. Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me and the country where you are living as an alien the same kindness that I have shown to you. Abram said, I swear it. Then Abram complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. But Abimelech said, I don't know who's done this. You didn't tell me, and I heard about it only today. So Abram brought sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a treaty. Abram set apart 7 ewe lambs from the flock, and Abimelech asked Abram, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs you've set apart by themselves? He replied, accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I dug this well. So that place was called Beersheba because the two men swore an oath there. Apparently, Beersheba can mean well of seven or well of an oath. It says in the notes at the bottom here. So, verse 32, after the treaty had been made at Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, returned to the land of the Philistines. Abram planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called upon the name of the Lord, the eternal God. And Abram stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. As indeed King David will do before he becomes king, further down the track. Let's take it step by step. And we begin, of course, with the birth of what we read, the birth of the promised son. Of course, as we are told, Abram's 100 years old. Sarah can't be that far behind. It's as if, or perhaps not as if, but it is, that God has waited this long so that there can be no mistake, there can be no doubt that this is all about him, that this is his story. It's Abram's story, of course, but principally it's God's story. And God wanted to show to Abram himself and Sarah and to the whole watching, waiting world and to everybody down the ages that God is the bringer of life, that God is the giver of life, that God can choose to withhold life, that God can choose to take back life, that God is life as God is love, and that God is the giver of life. And as I say, this is just brought home by the fact that there is no way imaginable, humanly possible, that Abram and Sarah could have children unless God reinvigorated their bodies so that they could, which is precisely what he did do. And of course, as is noted, he did it in fulfillment of his promise, in fulfillment of his word. He had said that Abram would have a son through Sarah, even though she was infertile. And you will recall how at one point it was she who suggested to Abram that in order to give God a helping hand, that Abram sleep with his maidservant Hagar, which created all kinds of problems and complications, which we come back to in a minute. But God didn't need their helping hand, and the complications that arose from it, they brought upon themselves, albeit that God in his mercy and his grace, as we shall see, deals with those. But no, God had said that Sarah would have a child by Abram, and it looks as though quite deliberately he waited until there could be no doubt whatsoever as to where and who this child came from. The son of promise, a foreshadowing, of course, of the son of promise to come centuries later, even millennia later, the Lord Jesus himself. But as I say, so there, that's what we need to recognize, that God is the giver of life, that all life depends on God, who is the giver and the taker of life. Whatever illusions men may have created for themselves about their control over life and over their own destiny, they are just that. They are just illusions, and extremely dangerous illusions from what I am seeing, from what I am hearing, from what I am reading about at the present time. We are really back in Babel country at the moment. One house of cards is going to come down after the other. With all the rack and ruin that brings. Yeah. But yes, the problem is that Hagar and Ishmael. So once again now, the rivalry, if you like, certainly antipathy between Sarah and Hagar is renewed by the birth of Isaac, because following God's command, Abram has Isaac circumcised first, and then when he's weaned, Abram throws a feast to which everybody's invited, of course, and Sarah sees Hagar's child. I'm not quite sure, to be honest, how old he would be or where he'd have got to by now, but she sees him smiling at her. I take that perhaps to be in a mocking way, maybe a kind of, yeah, but I'm the firstborn type of way. And that is precisely what Sarah says to Abram. He's not going to take from my boy, what's due to my boy, as she sees it. So send her away, this maidservant of yours, with her child. But of course, her child was also Abram's child. Abram had Ishmael, his firstborn, as far as I can make out, with Hagar. And this really hurt Abram. And it was only sort of on acting on under God's instructions that Abram does what Sarah tells him to do. Because the promise is that even though they have made a mistake and they have really messed up and there have been real complications that have arisen from all this, God in his mercy says to Abram, and he does say this, well, he's your son too, and it's because he's your son that I will make a great nation of him. So as history repeats itself, and Hagar is sent away, sent packing, we'll see in the following chapter, by the way, that it's with a heavy heart that Abram will have to load up the ass and to take the water skins and whatever to go on his own difficult journey. That's in the coming chapter. But it's here with a heavy heart that he sends off Hagar with Ishmael, but at least with God's promise, hopefully, ringing in his ears. And then God hears Ishmael crying in the desert, and he says to Hagar, don't you worry either. Don't you worry, I will make a great nation out of him. It is indeed through Isaac, the promised son, that Abram's line, which will eventually be, of course, the Israelites, the Jews, as a people, as a nation, it's through his line that the people will descend and continue. But God isn't just going to cast off or put to one side Ishmael. And then finally in this chapter, we see that Abimelech makes his return. And it's interesting what he says to Abram. He says, I can see that God is with you. I can see that God is blessing you. And I can see that God is prospering everything that you do. And it's because I can see that I want to get on your side. Can we make a treaty? Yes, Abram says to him, there's just one small matter that we've got to clear up, which is that your men came and took a well off me. Now, this is the point, isn't it? Abram, we'll see how peace-loving and well-disposed he is again in a minute. we've got to get a shift on. Abram realizes that it's probably best to have it out, and it's probably best to be honest and straightforward with each other before we go any further. And so that is what he says to Abimelech. You know, yeah, okay, but let there be no misunderstandings between us. Abimelech says, I'm sorry, there was a misunderstanding because nobody's told me about this. You haven't told me about this until now. So Abram can see that Abimelech is well disposed towards him, as Abimelech wants him to be well disposed towards him, Abimelech. And Abram, the peace-loving man, fundamentally, he makes a present to Abimelech, which of course, amongst other things, will help him to save face, whilst at the same time saying that the present is a kind of gauge for Abimelech to accept and admit, and for it to be understood amongst them all, that I dug this well. So Abram is making sure that he does actually get what's his. We've already taken up 16 minutes, so I'm going to leave you to draw your own conclusions from what we've read today. But I'll just mention in closing that God hears the baby's cry with Hagar in the desert. And at the end of the chapter, Abram plants his tamarisk trees, and there he calls upon the name of the Lord, the eternal God. So it's God hearing a baby's cry. It's God hearing Abram's prayer and prayers. These are the keys to a relationship with God. God in his grace gives life where there is no life, and helps us through the problems which we have created for ourselves. But all that remains for us to do, though indeed we do have to do it, is look to him, call upon him, trust him, talk things over, and talk things through with the Lord, the eternal God. I'll leave you there and see you next time around.